Yuki-Onna, Snow Woman by Yakumo Koizumi. Many years ago there was a rural village in Musashi province, not far from present-day Tokyo. An old woodcutter lived there called Masaku. After many years, Masaku felt that the work was becoming more tiring due to his age, and he took on a young apprentice from the village called Minakichi. Just 18 years old, Minakichi had an endearing innocence and made friends easily. He respected the old man and was keen to learn the ways of a woodcutter, when and how to cut wood, how to select the best wood and then craft it into a useful tool. For his part, Masaku was grateful for the young man's humility and diligence in his work, and he was hopeful that the skill and knowledge he had gained over so many years would not be lost. Each day they went together to the forest a few miles from the village. On the way to the forest they had to cross a wide river by way of a ferry boat. A bridge had been built several times at the crossing point, but each time the bridge had been carried away by a flood. No one had yet been able to build a bridge that could resist the current of the rising river. As Masaku and Minakichi left the forest on their way home, one very cold winter's evening, snow began to fall and a great wind came up. Soon they could barely find their way to the river path through the blizzard. When they reached the ferry, they found the boatman had gone away, leaving his boat on the other side of the river. The water was too deep and the current too strong to cross, and the two woodcutters took shelter in the ferryman's hut. There was no brazier in the hut, nor any place to make a fire. It was a small hut with a single door and no window. Thinking that they were lucky to find any shelter at all, they quickly fastened the door and lay down to rest between their straw raincoats, hoping that perhaps the storm would soon be over. The old man fell asleep almost immediately, but Minakichi lay awake a long time, listening to the deep roar of the river and the awful wind that was whipping at the corners of the hut. It was a terrible storm. The hut creaked like an old boat at sea, and the temperature became even colder. A drift of snow began to form against the sides of the hut. Minakichi shivered under his raincoat, but at last, in spite of the cold, he too fell asleep. Sometime during the night he was awakened by the cold of snowflakes on his face. The door of the hut had been forced open, and by the snowlight he could see the outline of a woman in the doorway, dressed all in white. She entered and bent low over Masaku, blowing her breath over him. It was like a bright white smoke. Then she turned to Minakichi and stooped over him. He tried to cry out, but found that he was unable to move or make any sound. The pale woman bent down lower until their faces almost touched. He saw that she was very beautiful, though her dark eyes made him afraid. Outside, the wind howled in the trees. She looked at him curiously for some time. Then she smiled and whispered, "Your fate should be that of the other man, but you are so young I cannot help feeling pity for you. You are a pretty boy, Minakichi. I will not hurt you now. But if you ever tell anyone, even your own mother, about what you have seen this night, I shall know it, and then I will kill you. Remember this." With these words she turned from him and passed through the doorway. As she left, Minakichi found he was again able to move. Pulling himself to his feet, he looked out the door into the storm and all around, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. After a search he was unable to find any footprints in the snow to indicate which way she had gone. He closed the door against the swirling snow and stacked several lengths of wood against it so it was secure. He wondered if the wind had blown the door open and he had only been dreaming. He might have mistaken the gleam of snowlight for a figure of a white woman, but he could not be sure. He called to Masaku and was frightened because the old man did not answer. Putting out his hand tentatively in the dark, he touched Masaku's face. It was like ice. Musaku was cold and stark and dead. By dawn, the storm was over, and when the ferryman returned to his station a little after sunrise, he found Minakichi lying senseless beneath the frozen body of Musaku. Minakichi was brought back to the village and cared for. He soon came to himself, but for a long time he was ill from the effects of the cold and that terrible night. He had been frightened by the old man's death, but he said nothing about the vision of the woman in white. As soon as he was well, he returned to his work, this time going alone every morning to the forest and coming back before nightfall with his bundles of wood, which his mother helped him to sell. In the winter of the following year, while he was on his way home one evening, Minakichi passed a girl who happened to be travelling along the same road. She was tall and slim and answered his greeting with a voice that was pure like a songbird. He walked beside her and they began to talk. The girl said her name was Oyuki and that she had recently lost her parents. She was on her way to Yedo, where she had some poor relations who may be able to help her find a position as a servant. Minakichi listened as she spoke and soon felt charmed by this strange girl. The more he looked at her, the more beautiful she appeared to be. He asked whether she was yet betrothed, and she answered, a little shyly, that she was free. Then, in turn, she asked Minakichi if he was married, or pledged to be married. He told her he had a widowed mother to support, but as yet the question of finding her a daughter-in-law had not been discussed, as he was still young. After these confidences they walked along for a while, without speaking. But there is an old saying, when the wish is there, the eyes can say so much. By the time they reached the village, they felt less awkward, and Minakichi asked Oyuki if she would like to rest a while at his house. After some hesitation, she went there with him, and his mother made her welcome. While they were sharing a meal, Oyuki behaved so nicely that Minakichi's mother was quite taken with her and persuaded the girl to delay her journey to Yedo. The natural conclusion was that Oyuki never went to Yedo at all. Instead, she remained at the house, and in time she and Minakichi were married. Oyuki proved to be a very good wife. When Minakichi's mother came to the end of her life some 5 years later, her last words were of affection and praise for the wife of her son. As the years passed, Oyuki bore many children, boys and girls, yet she always looked young and seemed to remain as fresh as the day she first came to stay with Minakichi. The women of the village greatly admired Oyuki and thought it wonderful that she was so hard-working but always so cheerful and welcoming, while the men of the village admired and also envied Minakichi because his wife was so beautiful and always so devoted to him and their children. Minakichi became contented and happy with his good fortune and felt blessed to have such a wife and family. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Oyuki was sewing by the light of a paper lamp, and Minakichi, watching her, said, "To see you there sewing, with the light on your face, reminds me of something strange that happened years ago. I was just 18 at the time, and I saw someone as beautiful and white as you are now. Yes, she was very much like you." Without lifting her eyes from the work, Oyuki said, "Tell me about her. Where did you see her?" Then Minakichi told her about the terrible night in the ferryman's hut, and about the white woman who had stooped over him, her face so close, smiling and whispering, and about the silent death of old Musaku. He said, "Asleep or awake, that was the only time I saw anyone as beautiful as you. But she was not human, and I was afraid of her, very much afraid. She was so white. I have never been sure whether it was a dream that I saw or the woman of the snow." At these words, Oyuki threw down her sewing and rose to face Minokichi where he sat. Her eyes were wide and despairing, and she let out a great shriek of anguish. It was I, Yuki, and I told you then that I would kill you if you ever said one word of it." The woman's eyes became dark, and seeing them darken in that moment of horror, Minokichi felt time stand still and his heart froze. His wife's anguish became a fury such that Minokichi had never seen. "But for those children asleep there, I would kill you this moment. And now you had better take very, very good care of them, for if they ever have reason to complain of you, I will return and you will receive what you deserve." Even as Oyuki screamed, her voice became thin, like the wind crying, and her form became as a wraith, indefinite as it melted into a bright white mist that spired up to the roof beams and disappeared. She was never seen there again.